Orwell, you may recall, had a concept which he called doublethink. Doublethink is the capacity to have two contradictory ideas in mind at the same time and believe both of them. That's almost a definition of the intellectual culture. But this was a dramatic case. And immediately after that crime, the punishment of the Gaza Strip sharply increased. Got worse later. I won't go through the details, but it's pretty awful. Very savage siege, brutality, and so on. It peaked December 2008 with the latest U.S.-Israeli invasion, which was murderous and destructive. The invasion, the U.S. It's called an Israeli invasion. It's a U.S.-Israeli invasion. U.S. arms, U.S. diplomatic support, and so on. It was given a pretext, but every act of aggression has a pretext, so you have to ask, does it mean anything? Actually, the pretext was that Israel was defending itself against rockets from Gaza. That pretext is accepted by the human rights groups, by the Goldstone Commission, by about 100% of commentary. It doesn't have a particle of credibility. Israel and the U.S. knew exactly how to stop the rockets. There had been a ceasefire, and during the ceasefire, Israel admits there was not a single Hamas rocket. Israel violated the ceasefire a couple of months earlier, and the rockets started. Hamas called for renewing the ceasefire. Israel considered it and refused. Well, you know, the use of force when you haven't exhausted, even tried peaceful means is just pure, it's just major war crimes. I mean, the discussion about the war crimes in Gaza is trivial in comparison. So Israel, in fact, got a free pass from the Goldstone report and others. Well, since then, the savagery continues. I won't go on the details. I'm talking too long. It's pretty similar in the West Bank. The restrictions are not as severe in the West Bank as they are in Gaza, which has become basically unlivable. That's the point. But they're bad. But Israel has finally understood in the West Bank that it should do what every colonial power has done. They don't punish the entire population. Ensure that the elites are making out fine. You go to any third world country, you know, under colonial rule or neo-colonial rule, and there's a sector of wealth and privilege which is, you know, beyond anything that we dream of. And Israel's finally understood that that's what you do. So if you go to Ramallah, you can go to elegant restaurants and you know, go to the theater. It's just like being in Paris and London. You go a couple of miles away, and it's horrible. But that allows the journalists and others to talk about the wonderful achievements in the West Bank. Well, when you run in fact, Israel is following, finally, the explicit recommendation of Israeli industrialists about 10 years ago, who urged that Israel should move from, what their words, from colonialism to neo-colonialism. It should establish the standard neo-colonial structures like this. It took a long time to realize it, but they're doing it. In fact, that becomes even more like South Africa. South Africa relied on the Bantustans, and it tried to keep them, they're pretty awful, but it tried to keep them viable. It needed them. That was their labor force. So they kept them going. They tried to get international recognition for them, but outside Israel, no country recognized them. Israel's not doing it for all the West Bank. It's just doing it for the elite sector in Ramallah, where the Palestinian Authority is. Well, if you want to maintain a neo-colonial system, you have to have an iron fist, so you need military force. And there is one. It's the army run by General Keith Dayton. Actually, that's the more mild of the military forces, but the better known one. U.S. general runs an army, trained in Jordan with U.S.-Israeli participation and support, and it keeps a grip over the population. In fact, the Obama administration was particularly impressed by how well the army worked during the attack on Gaza. During the attack on Gaza, there were no protests in the West Bank. which kind of surprised everyone. And that's attributed to the power of the Dayton Army, which prevented any protests. So Palestinians, of course, they can't demonstrate or anything, but they were not even allowed to protest the destruction of the other half of Palestine, what's going on in Gaza. John Kerry, in particular, head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, was particularly impressed with this. And he said, finally, he said, Israel may have a legitimate partner for peace, thanks to the success of the General Dayton Army in suppressing the population sufficiently so they can't even protest against massive atrocities. Well, let's turn finally to the options for Palestinians. What are they? Here the discussion, I think, is pretty misleading, and you should think it through. One option, of course, is the international consensus, and there's a barrier. The U.S. won't accept it, but that's our problem. Now, a very common view, you hear it all over the place now, from Palestinians, from Israeli doves, from the supporters of Palestinians here, that the alternative to that is that Israel takes over the territories, it becomes a single state, and you can have a civil rights struggle, an anti-apartheid struggle within this single state in which Palestinians will be roughly half the population. And that's many of the doves, including Palestinian leaders, think, okay, that's better than the vanishing two-state settlement. There's only one problem with that logic. Those are not the two alternatives. There's a third alternative, which isn't discussed. The third alternative is that the U.S. and Israel continue doing exactly what they're doing. And what they're doing is very clear. It has a name. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert called it convergence. What you do, what Israel with U.S. backing is doing, is taking over everything, annexing everything behind the separation wall, some of the most valuable land, all the water resources, that's quite crucial in this arid region. It takes over the Jordan Valley, more fertile territory, kicks out the Palestinians, and runs some salients, settlement salients right through the territories. Actually, there are three of them. Big one east of Greater Jerusalem. Jerusalem's been sharply expanded. There's one that goes almost to Jericho, and two others to the north, one taking in the town of Ariel, the other town of Kadumim. You take a look at a map. If you look at a map, it looks as if it doesn't penetrate too deeply into the West Bank, but that's misleading because the area where it doesn't penetrate is mostly rocky desert where you can't settle. The livable part of the West Bank is broken up into four major cantons, what Ariel Sharon, in fact, the architect of this, called Bantustans. He was honest, except that they're not cared for as well as the Bantustans. So Israel will take those. No demographic problem. Very few Palestinians. If there are a few, you kick them out. No problem of too many non-Jews in a Jewish state. No civil rights struggle. No apartheid struggle. As for the Palestinians, they can rot up in the hills. Israel takes no responsibility for them. They can follow a proposal of Moshe Dayan back in '67, the defense minister who was in charge. He said we should tell the Palestinians that we have no solution for you. You're going to live like dogs, and whoever wants to leave can leave, and we'll see where that goes. Well, yeah, that's the policy. And that's the real alternative to a two-state settlement. There is no alternative of the kind that's being discussed, because neither Israel nor the United States, nor in fact anyone in the world, is going to accept that. Rather, they'll continue doing exactly what they're doing. Now, that's not going to change unless there are changes inside the United States. As in the current world scene, it's hard to see where else changes could come from. And that's kind of an optimistic conclusion for us, for people who oppose current U.S.-Israeli policies, because here is the one place where we can influence what happens. And here is the one place that matters. That's where there's going to make a decisive difference. Now, there are implications for tactical choices. I think they should be pretty obvious, but I'll stop there. Sorry to have gone on too long.